Okay, so you got two handouts today. We're going to work on exercise 125 in class today, but it's very much coupled and goes hand in hand with assignment 106. Assignment 106, aside from your final portfolio, which is due in about a month, by the way, aside from that, it's the last assignment. So there isn't going to be anything else. We made it to the end, at least for that. So we're looking at this plus the final portfolio, and we're going to wind up the semester. So it's the same program as the AutoCAD. If you choose to change or modify or discover new things when you model in 3D, that's perfectly okay. I'm not looking for it to be identical. If it is identical, that's okay too. So it's a fresh take on your assignment 105, but we're going to build it in 3D. The emphasis is going to be certainly in modeling it in 3D, but also in the exporting and collaging of this into some standard views. We will, in class, be creating elevations, plans, and sections from your view. We'll also do a perspective. If you follow along and you do those, you can pick 3 of those views. Maybe you enhance those views a little bit, 3 of the 4, and you're going to turn those in as part of your assignment 106. So you will need to pick from a plan, an elevation, a section, and a perspective. So you pick 3 of those, which basically means that if one doesn't turn out, you can scrap that one, which I think is a fair way of doing it. And those 3 images then will make up your assignment 106. So I know the stress level creeps up as the semester starts to wind down. You've got a lot of work in other classes, and that's part of why I try to structure this such that a lot of the work that you can do in class coupled with your exercises. So if you're here and you work the whole time, there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to do the bulk of the work in class so that you're not overly stressing about all the stuff that you have to do. So we're going to start today in exercise 125 with building the 3D model of your cabin. And like I said, if you want to modify it or you want to change it, that's perfectly fine. You could start entirely from scratch in drawing it. But I think sometimes showing you the workflow from AutoCAD into SketchUp, such as it is a good way of showing you how you can work with the 2 programs. And I will warn you ahead of time that it's not as smooth as it should be. So there's always little glitches that will happen. And I will probably... I did this twice as practice to make sure that everything was working and whatever prior to lecture. One time it worked perfectly seamlessly. The second time it was horrible. And it was the exact same file. So I don't know that there's something that you can predict whether it's going to work seamlessly or not. But at least I'm going to try to walk you through it live so that you can see it. So I went ahead and I opened up my last work, which was the layout view of my floor plans. And instead of working in this layout view, I'm going to switch back into model space so that I'm looking at the black and white version with my folded out elevations. This is the file that I ultimately want to bring over to the world of AutoCAD, or excuse me, to the world of SketchUp. So I don't really have to do anything, assuming that this file looks the way I want it to. I don't really have to change anything in AutoCAD. I just need to save it as a file that's ultimately going to be an export file. So I'll go to the Save As command, and I can choose, and we'll put it in today's folder in exercise 125. And the good news is we have SketchUp 2016, and they have no problem with AutoCAD 2013. So that's the file format, so we're good to go. You can see that I've already saved it here. I like to make a duplicate of my file just so that I know this is the one that I'm going to work with in case something were to happen. So I've gone ahead and I've saved that in AutoCAD. And we're going to go ahead and open up SketchUp now. All right, so let me go ahead and start using SketchUp here. I'm going to choose my template as being the architectural design feet and inches. We'll go ahead and start using the template here. We don't need the autosave file. Let's get rid of the little person. And so now I'm going to go ahead and bring in the AutoCAD file. And so I'll go to File and then Import. And by default, AutoCAD is usually not showing. We want to make sure we pick AutoCAD files. And then we can go to my flash drive where I saved the AutoCAD file. and exercise 125, there it is. And I always, whenever there's an options button, you always want to click it just in case. There actually aren't any things that you need to change here, but I always like to do it. Actually, there is something I need to change, and that is that the units shouldn't be in feet, they should be in inches, because the AutoCAD default units are in inches. So I'm glad I checked that. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll go ahead and click on the import button. Now, when I did this on my laptop earlier today, it took a little while to process. It, again, depends a little bit on the complexity of your drawing. That worked fairly fast. I'll go ahead and click Close on the import results. And if I zoom out here, we can see that there's my building. And let's confirm. I'm going to use the tape measure here. I'm going to confirm that this is the correct size. Yeah, 15 feet, that works. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't off in my size. Now, one of the things that's important to note when we bring in the AutoCAD file is everything that is part of the AutoCAD file comes in, and those things come in on layers. And so we haven't really talked about layers just yet, and I think this is a good introduction to layers. But much like the world of AutoCAD, SketchUp has different layers. And we can access those layers using the default tray on the right side here. Otherwise, we could go to the window and then somewhere select that there would be layers. But anyway, we'll go ahead and open up this layers. And we can see under this layers tray, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger, that all of the layers from AutoCAD came in, which is exactly what I want. And all of my lines are organized by these layers. So if I zoom in a little bit more, there we go, on my floor plan here, and I'm looking at it, these layers correspond to the various things. So for example, if I wanted to turn the topography off, there's a little checkbox for visible, and all the topography goes off. If I wanted to turn off some of my blocks, I could turn them off. Let's see if I can find one. There, the kitchen, I can turn the kitchen off. So you guys kind of see how that's working. Now, one of the things is you have to pay attention to how carefully you modeled, okay, and how carefully done your layers are. So for example, when I turned off the kitchen layer, I lost those windows, okay, which is a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to go in before I do anything else, and I'm going to try to select those windows without selecting these. I don't want these, that. And I'm going to change the layer of these. And I can do that by clicking and opening the entity info, right? And then I can go to layers and change this. Oh, the sink drain is still selected. Thanks. And I want to change that to, we'll go back to walls for now, right? And so it may be easier to go back to the AutoCAD file and fix it there. It depends on what you're more comfortable in. For me, it would be faster to go back to the AutoCAD file and fix those corrections. But I wanted to at least point out that you can make these corrections. The other thing is when we really start to model, a lot of the detail that we put in, so like the refrigerator and the kitchen counters and whatever, chances are you're going to look for SketchUp components to drop some various things in, as opposed to actually trying to build out what the table and chairs look like in SketchUp. Just go find another set of tables and chairs. So it's always a good idea to go through and kind of clean your drawing. And so really what I want to be looking at is just the walls with their cutouts. You know, maybe the windows, maybe the doors, maybe not. It depends. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to clean off a bunch of stuff that really doesn't matter. So the no print layer can go away. I'll select the no print, and I'll click this little minus sign, and that'll go away. I'm actually going to get rid of the doors because I don't want to have to model the doors. So we'll make those go away. We can see that there's a few little lines that didn't quite go away when I deleted them that were part of the doors. Make those go away. And then I'll continue on. I want to keep the elevations. The guides I don't need, so we'll click the little minus sign, delete the contents. They can go away. The windows, I'm not going to keep them either. Delete the contents. There, those go away. We'll continue our way up. Whatever layer 1 is, I don't need. Delete that. That was a little door over here. The roof, I don't need either. So delete that. So it'll be up to you to decide which pieces really need to stay and which pieces need to go. the more that you clean up your drawing, the easier it's long-term going to be to work with. And so let's see here. We've got walls. I'm obviously keeping the walls. Don't need this. Don't need this. And again, you could do this in AutoCAD if you'd rather, but I'm already in SketchUp, so that's fine. And this table and chairs was on layer 0. I can't delete layer 0. It's one of the default layers in SketchUp, so we'll keep it for now. I'll delete that. Now, I'm down to topography, walls. I don't know what text is. Let's get rid of that layer. Don't need that. So I have topography, walls, and elevations. Those are kind of the basics that I need. I'm going to go ahead and turn off everything except the topography for right now. And unfortunately, there's another mistake. These should have been on the topography layer. There's a couple little topo lines that aren't. So let me go back and change those to be on the topography layer. OK, so let's turn off the elevations. There we go. So all I have left are all the topography lines. Okay? I'm going to take all of the topography lines, and once they're selected, I'll right-click on them and say Make Group. This is very much like we did last time, because I want this to act as its own independent object and not attached to anything. Right? So I go ahead and I make it a group. Now that it's a group, right, we can turn off the topography. I can turn back on the walls, and I can select those walls. And once again, I'll right-click and say Make Group. So for each of these objects, I'm making a group. So let me look here at the elevations. I'm going to do each elevation as a separate group. So I'll right-click and say Make Group. I'll right-click and say Make Group. I'll right-click and say Make Group. And I'll right-click and say Make Group. OK, so those are all groups. So every one of the objects that I have left is its own group, which is important before we get started. So now let's go ahead and turn off the topography. Let's turn off the elevations, and let's work with just the floor plan here. And so I'm going to zoom in here on the floor plan a little bit, and we'll get it to look there. OK, can I get rid of that guide? Let's get rid of that. OK, so now I have just the walls showing. I'm going to create a brand new layer, and I'll call that layer 3D. And I'm going to make that the current layer by changing the little radio button next to the layers to be on the 3D layer. So anything that I create is now going to be part of that layer. Okay? And so now that I'm on that layer, I'm going to go ahead and start drawing. And what I'll do is I'll draw just a large rectangle that's larger than my floor plan, something like that. Now, I said before that this group, I made a group before I did anything so that I would not attach the objects that I was creating to this group without intentionally doing so. One of the reasons that I make it a group, if I were to copy this over, I'll explode it and show you in a second. Let me explode this one. If I were to just draw that same rectangle, not where there's a group, theoretically, it should try to divide up this surface with these lines, but it never does a particularly good job. Okay? Sometimes it'll do some of the, let's say maybe I drew a box in here. See how it fills in some of the pieces, but it leaves a bunch of the pieces blank? For whatever reason, that's one of the complications of bringing in an AutoCAD file. So with that being said, if I make it a group, I have a little bit finer control over how this happens. So I have a couple choices here. When I'm at this stage and I have the rectangle underneath the group, I can choose to select the group, and I can choose to explode it at this point, which should divide some of this surface. And so if we click on the surface, you can see that a lot of my walls ended up being cut out. Okay, but some of them I missed. So for example, I'm missing a door there. So I'm going to have to go in after the fact and connect a few of these pieces there and there. And it might, or might not, separate out the various pieces. See, like there, I added those two, but it still didn't separate it out. Probably means there's somewhere else where it's not connected. There's a piece over there. Connect there to there. And it's failing a bit. So I'll have to work my way through some of these pieces to try to divide up the surface. And we'll add a few extra lines in a variety of places. Right? So there I was able to partition that piece off. So it'll take me a little bit of time to go through and kind of figure it out. One of the strategies would be to use the rectangle tool and to identify where a wall is and see if that can punch and disconnect the walls together. It works sometimes. It doesn't work sometimes. Obviously, I'm having trouble with this particular piece and getting that to separate. So the alternative to this, which is slightly more work, but it may be less work in the long run. Let me just jump back a few steps here. Is instead of exploding this group, it's to just take your pen tool and to start tracing over your lines. And when I do that, it generally does a very good job of identifying where the various surfaces are. Okay, so essentially I've divided those two. So with a little bit of work, right, we can go through and essentially trace over my lines. There's a wall. Go to there. That. And now that wall is separate. All right, anywhere it's just a rectangular wall, I can just draw a rectangle. That separates. This one is essentially a rectangle. I can draw that. There it is. Same thing here. Same thing along this wall. I will ultimately be extruding things. So when I did those rectangles, I missed a few little pieces. Right? I can go back and just select the line, get rid of the line, and this becomes one surface. Right? Likewise here, I can get rid of, let me draw one little rectangle right there. And I can get rid of that line, and this becomes a surface. So I can make modifications. I did the same thing here. So we'll add a little bit. We'll add that. We'll add this. And it kind of depends a little bit on what your workflow is and what's faster for you, whether you want to do rectangles and then add, or whether you want to use the line tool and just trace over. The more complicated the lines are, generally the more, the easier it would be to just trace over. Something like that. That's, oops. Obviously, I did a bad job tracing. This way. And every once in a while, you just end up with a piece that's just extraordinarily stubborn and doesn't want to detach. So that is this little piece right here that I'm struggling with. There we go. Finally got it. Get rid of this. Now that's one piece. I need to get rid of a few of these lines to join this together. And now that's one little piece. I could actually join it to the whole wall, and that's one piece of the wall. So it does take some time to go through and make these modifications, but it's not extraordinarily time consuming, and it's certainly easier than redrawing it entirely by hand. So bear with me a little bit while we go through this. There's that wall. Right. Remember, since I have the walls layer, I can turn off the walls layer and see where I am and where I'm not. Right. So I'm still missing a few of these little walls here. So let's go ahead and do this wall, that wall. We'll get rid of that little piece. And sorry, I have to check where I am. Oh, bathroom wall. Yep, good. And let's turn those off. Okay, so once I have my walls established, I can actually get rid of the floors for right now, which is everything except for the walls. I could, instead of getting rid of the floors, I could also chop up the floors a little bit by dividing, say, there, which should separate out. Let me do one more little piece here. Divide there. All right, reasonably close. Okay, so then I can get rid of these extra pieces like that. And then it's a matter of starting to push and pull. Okay, so I said that my building had some different heights to it. I can choose, let me get rid of this for a second, to remember what the heights were. I could go back and measure, but I can also use my elevations to my advantage. So let me go ahead and turn on the elevations here for a second. And remember, each of those was made into a group. And what I can do is, based on where the floor level is, and I'll use this one as an example, I can rotate this object. So I know that right there is the floor level. So I'm going to rotate this so that it's up in 3 dimensions so that I can use it as a guide for how tall to pull my walls. So what I'll do, because rotating is a little bit hard without an actual object, is I'm just going to create a temporary little square, or excuse me, a cube, something like that. And then I can select my objects, including the cube, and I can use the rotate tool and use the cube to help me rotate in the 3 dimensions. So we'll go from that corner, we'll put a reference point here, and we want that whole thing to come up in the 3rd dimension like that. Okay, and then I can go back in after the fact, and I can delete my little cube here. Okay, so now when I go and do the push-pull, I can use this as a reference for how far to push or pull a particular wall. So for example, I can start with, let me use push-pull here, I can start with this wall, and I can come across and snap to where it falls on my elevation. I could take the next wall, which is right here, and I could go to where that falls. Falls right there. I could take this piece and I could pull it till it matches up with that. You guys get the idea. So I'm using these elevations as reference points for where they fit within the context of my overall design. Okay? I can do the same thing with these other 2 elevations. The key is that you have to make sure that your ground level is the level of the building. Remember, the building extends a little bit lower initially. So if I were rotating this elevation, for example, I'd use this plane right there as my ground level. So let me create a little cube, pull this up as a reference point. And let's go ahead and select all of this. We'll use the rotate tool again. There we go. We'll go from here to straight up. And if you move close enough, you should get it to snap to straight up. Okay. There it is. And so I could use this elevation as a reference point for, say, these walls over here. So again, I could push-pull this piece until it matches up with that wall there. Does that kind of make sense for how I'm going about doing it? So I'm using those as references. Ultimately, when it gets to creating the windows, right, it may be easier to build the windows right on top of the elevation, group them, and then move them until you intersect them with the building. Okay? And I can show you that in a little bit. But I want you guys to get started, and then I'll build up the rest of this shape, and then we'll talk about how do you get the windows and that sort of thing. Okay? Are there any questions before you get started? No? Okay, so we'll continue in a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about the windows, but I want you to get started with the floor plans.